Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and even though I've covered aspects of this again recently, I've still had people asking me in the comments, hey, why are you doing deficit deadlifts? What's the point? Hey, why are you standing on plates? I don't understand the benefit of this. So let me break this down for you guys. What I'm doing is called a deficit deadlifts. And as you guys notice, I'm doing them once a week, and I am trying to work up to 10 sets with any given weight. When I can do 10 sets of 3 comfortably with good bar speed, good technique, I add weight to reduce sets slightly and rebuild from there. Now, the reason I'm using deficit deadlifts is multifold in nature. Number one, by standing on plates and by wearing boots, I move myself up further from the floor. Now, some people have joked and said, what is this, to make you look taller? No, but it is to make you taller. It does make you taller in respect to pulling the barbell. In other words, you're moving your feet further up. My feet are now close to 2.5 to 3 inches higher off the ground than they would be if I was barefooted or in a minimalist sole. Interestingly enough, the deadlift, and anyone who knows this knows that the bottom of the deadlift is the hardest part. Breaking it off the floor is the most difficult part. And if you don't believe me, go do your touch and go deadlifts. A lot of guys out there do touch and go deadlifts. They pull their first rep from the floor and then they bounce the weight off the floor and they do 5 or 6 reps. Now, if you don't think coming off the floor is the hardest part, by a long shot, take that same weight that you can touch and go 6 reps with and actually make it come to a full stop on the floor and count for a full second, say 1/1000, while it's on the floor, and then pull it again. The weight that you pull 6 bouncing it off the floor, you might only get 2 reps, you might only get 3 reps with at the most. The reason, because you're skipping the hardest part of the exercise, thus making it a lot easier. And in that case, sometimes a 2 rep max or a 3 rep max you can crank out 6 reps with. Sometimes for multiple sets. So what does that tell you? That it allows you to move the weight a lot more times because you've taken by far the hardest part of the exercise out. In other words, obviously, it allows you to complete multiple reps in place of the 1 rep from touching the floor. That's how much energy you aren't expending in terms of the difference. By doing a deficit deadlift, you are taking the most difficult part of the lift and making it more difficult. In other words, you are forcing yourself to work even harder with the same amount of weight. So for most people to do the same reps and sets, they have to reduce the weight on the bar. But it also trains you to get more explosive because it forces you to work harder and add several inches to the hardest part of the range of motion. And remember, moving the weight further is more difficult. So in 2 different aspects, you are making the lift more difficult. You have to recruit more muscle fibers. It also trains you to get tighter, because it's even more difficult to do so. It's much harder to just jerk that weight off the floor. So you have to find your best leverages. You have to learn to get really tight and to get even more explosive off the floor when you perform a deficit deadlift. Well, that not only forces you to recruit more muscle fibers because of the longer range of motion and all of that, it forces you to get better at the deadlift. It forces you to get better at the hard part, the dead part. We call it a deadlift because you pull it from a dead stop on the floor. That's where the name deadlift comes from. You're making the dead part of the deadlift even harder. All right, and what this will do is that it gives you more pop off the floor, so that when you return to a normal deadlift, a normal deficit, or normal conventional deadlift, it's easier to break it off the floor. In other words, you generate more bar speed. It trains you to be more explosive, which in turn will increase your max, and it'll even increase the amount of weight you can use on work sets. So there's a lot of benefits to doing this. Now, for me, there's also a hypertrophy end. I have long arms. One of the reasons that some people, when I'm sitting down, are surprised when they find out I'm only 5'9". I've had a lot of people over the years say, hey, I thought you were like 6'2", 6'3". Well, because I have the upper body of a tall person. I have long arms, I have a big collarbone, big rib cage, all that stuff. But I have stumpy legs. In other words, I got my dad's torso and I got my mom's legs, because my mom was 4'11". So I have stumpy legs and long arms. Well, that makes deadlifting easier for me. So by doing deficits, I actually am having to recruit more muscle fibers and I will get more hypertrophy out of it. In other words, it's better for building up my hamstrings, glutes, back, all of that. They get worked harder. And because I have a leverage advantage, a little better leverage advantage over most people, not everybody, I have above average leverages because of my long arms. This removes my advantage and it makes me work harder. So that I can build more muscle. So there's a lot of benefits to that. Now, the other thing we come to is the recovery side. A lot of people don't understand when they talk about recovery, they think recovery is purely about how hard you work. There's a lot of factors in recovery. And axial loading, compression of the spine, is one of the big factors in recovery. The more compression of the spine that you have, the slower your overall recovery. Now, the upside being most exercises that load your spine up with weight are some of the best exercises ever invented for building size, for building strength, because they work so many large numbers of muscles in your body. And examples, the standing press, the deadlift, any sort of squat, right? These are exercises that we think of as putting very serious amounts of size and strength on people. The push press, the power clean. These are the exercises you would do if you wanted to get as strong and as big as possible. You would do lots of these exercises. Well, I do a lot of these exercises, and the problem is that balancing out recovery. Because I'm dealing with axial loading exercises, there's a finite amount of volume you can get away with on things like squats, deadlifts, overhead presses, everything else before recovery starts to build up. Because I'm doing a variation of the exercise on a lift that I'm very strong on, I'm pretty strong on deadlifts. Not the strongest in the world, but I have respectable lifts on the deadlifts. In most gyms, you're not going to find guys, in at least half of gyms in this country, you're not going to find people who deadlift what I lift. Now, there's other gyms to where people just blow me out of the water where there's 30 guys there who can out deadlift me, but those are very specialized niche gyms, usually full of elite lifters. But I'm doing pretty good. I'm definitely above average here. Now, that being said, obviously I have the ability to generate workloads that can very seriously interfere with my recovery on something like the deadlift. In other words, it's relatively easy for someone like me to overtrain if I were to go 100% within a fairly quick period of time, and I know this from past experience on the exercise. So this is another area where the deficit deadlift comes in handy. You can recover slightly easier from it. Now, am I saying that it doesn't pound your recovery? Am I saying that it doesn't beat your body up a bit? No, I'm not saying that, because it does. You're still moving very heavy poundages from a dead stop and doing it for a lot of volume in the case of what I'm doing. Again, working towards 10 sets of 3 every week. Again, you can really beat your recovery up that way, but it won't beat it up quite as bad. And when you're doing something like I'm doing, to where I'm not bulking, I'm not in a calorie surplus, while trying to continue to lose body fat and to gain small amounts of muscle and strength, selecting exercises like this, at least for periods of time, that are easier to recover from versus their standard variation that also have tremendous carryover to the standard exercise. Meaning, if you get stronger on your deficit deadlift, your normal deadlift goes up. But if you can do so without beating your recovery up quite as much, this becomes a really, really beneficial tool. And again, for higher volume phases of training, particularly when calories aren't high, you're not in a surplus, you're not gaining weight, exercises like the deficit deadlift become very, very valuable. Just like I've said before, things like the front squat can become very valuable exercises for this exact same reason. I did a video on that the other day. That's why I'm choosing these 2 variations right now. They're what I'm doing them every week. They are primary exercises for me at the moment, not accessories. By selecting exercises like that, you can still get the benefit of these big full body exercises that put weight and compress the spine, but you can do so without compressing the spine quite as much. So therefore, your overall recovery tends to be slightly improved. Now, is this going to make a big difference? Probably not. For most people, are you really and truly going to see a big difference there? No. But if you're someone like me, a more advanced lifter, working on recompositioning and fat loss at the moment, being selective with an exercise like that and saying, okay, I'm going to use this variation that makes me work a little harder, that I can recover from a little easier, that maybe I can squeeze out one more set every week on without overtraining, it could make just enough of a difference to make a difference. Again, this isn't world changing, but it's useful. It's just one more tool in the toolbox that can be helpful in the right situation, and that's what it is. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.